if you or anybody who might be listening to this or whatever has ever like had this moment where everything comes to a head and your life gets really, really dark very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And you get tunnel vision and you're just thinking to yourself, what happened?
Yeah.
How did I get here? How did the kid who just wanted to be loved? How did the kid who just wanted to be good at sports? How did the kid who just wanted to fit in? Like, how is he now in the back of a cop car in handcuffs facing felony drug charges?
Welcome to the Just Live podcast. I'm your host, Olivia Stevens, and I'm inviting you in on my personal journey of learning and discovering how to live a life with more connection, joy, and purpose. I'll be sitting down with people from all walks of life to dive into topics including trauma, mental health, mindfulness, the nuances of love and relationships, and much more. I hope these conversations empower you to expand on what serves you, release what doesn't, and just live. I, for the longest time, was always so mad at myself that I wasn't like that I wasn't like happy all of the time, positive all of the time. But now I realize that that's just not normal, at least not for me.
Like, there's a fine line between like being hyper negative about a situation and just like letting that just eat at you for like weeks at a time versus being like, all right, the situation is fucking horrible. However, like, what am I going to do about it?
Right.
Am I going to just sit here and like just continue to like blame that situation for how I feel every single day? Or am I going to just talk about the problem so much because I know I can get attention from that problem? Or am I going to like focus on a solution?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's easy. It would be easy for me to be like, you know, oh my God, I'm a victim. I got hit by a fucking tractor trailer. Like, I'm just going to not work right now. I'm going to bitch. I'm not going to manage my emotions. And if I fuck up and say something out of character, I'll just be like, well, I mean, I'm stressed, you know?
Yeah. Why do you think so many people get stuck in that victim mentality?
I think it's easy, right? I
Yeah.
think it's the easiest thing for people to get caught up in because a lot of people, when they're going through something challenging, whether that be, you know, like a breakup, they lose a job, they do something out of line, a lot of times their self-esteem is low, right?
Right.
And so taking somebody who has a low level of self-esteem and being like, all right, when you're feeling incredibly low about yourself, I want you to take ownership of all your actions, behaviors, habits, emotions. Look yourself in the mirror and say, this is all on you.
Yeah.
Like, telling that to somebody who has super low self-esteem, it's so overwhelming because they're like,
Yeah.
I already feel like crap about myself. Like, how do you want me to do this? And so I think there's that. And I also think that people feel unconfident and like hopeless when they're in those moments, to where it's just super easy to not do anything.
Yeah.
And to blame that event, because sometimes like it can be challenging. Like, I think when you are faced with a difficult situation that is going to take a lot of time, like losing a bunch of weight that you might have to lose for your health, or rebuilding your self-confidence after like a bad breakup, or you do something to somebody that you're now forced to rebuild your own trust, rebuild trust with them. Like, that's overwhelming and that's freaking hard. And that's going to take time. So I think a lot of times it's just easier to stay in that set place instead of like putting in the work that might take months or even years to like pull yourself out of that hole, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. I feel like there's that quote where people say usually the right path is the hardest one. You know, a lot of people like avoid that hard path because of the change and what it brings, and that it is challenging. But like you said, I think that taking that path is the best way to manage the event and move forward and find a solution.
Yeah, because either way, I think both paths are hard, right? I think the path of growth and healing and radical responsibility, like, that's challenging. Because that's going to force you to look yourself in the mirror and come to terms with mistakes you've made, come to terms with accepting how somebody treated you, coming to terms with the fact that you might not feel good for a while, you know, about yourself because of situations in your life. But the growth that comes from that is life-changing, because now you develop this adversity muscle, you develop this resilience muscle that next time you're faced with a hard situation, your subconscious in a way is like, you got this. Like, you've gotten through so much. You got through that last situation. And then your body starts to get a little bit more used to it, versus like the other way where you're just sitting there and you're not doing the work. Life's still going to be hard.
Yeah.
Because you're going to see it play out in your job. You're going to see it play out in relationships. You're going to probably deal with some regret, because deep down people know that they need to make that right move, right? They know when they're not happy and they need to take that step.
Yeah.
But it's like, when have you had enough pain to actually take that step?
Yeah, to finally be tired of it.
It's like in AA or NA or 12 steps, it's like they say, you get sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah.
And that's life. And I think there's so many parallels between recovery programs and like day-to-day life, like in 12 steps. And I'm not in 12 step, but in those communities, it's like one day at a time.
Right. I want to backtrack a little bit for those that are listening and don't know your story. At one point in time, you were a convicted felon, correct?
Yeah, I was.
You are. Or were, sorry.
Well, I mean, I guess.
You were.
Yeah.
No, you're not, because you got didn't the charge get dropped?
It got expunged. Expunged from my record.
Okay. Anyway, at one time, you were a convicted felon, and you are now a best-selling author, motivational speaker, podcast host, personal trainer, fitness coach, life coach.
Right.
Anything else I'm missing on the resume?
Sharp dressed man.
Do you think it's an accurate statement that most people, when they come out of prison or come out of those circumstances, don't have a success story like yours?
Yeah. I mean, I would say the odds are greatly stacked against people.
Why?
I think it's a variety of reasons. I think this system is kind of set up in a way, in my opinion, to not help people like rehab when they're inside the prison system. I think people's circumstances are different. Like people grow up in sometimes some unfortunate situations that they have to go back to when they get out of prison or jail. They don't have family. They don't have people they can lean on. So they go back into the same behaviors and habits from before they were in jail, because that's just what they're used to.
Right.
People have trauma that they just didn't have an opportunity to heal. So that's like showing up in their day-to-day life when they got out. I think in my opinion, what saved me was learning how to like reattach behavior to emotion.
Okay.
And I think the main reason that I went to jail is because I didn't know how to manage my emotions as a kid.
Can you take us back to what your life looked like before you got arrested and kind of who Doug was back then?
Yeah. I mean, I think before I went to jail, it was like I was the guy your parents would never want you to hang out with. They would never want you to date. They'd never want you to be associated with him. There was people in my life before I went to jail, or even after I got out of jail, that were told not to hang out with me by their family. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, my podcast is called The Adversity Advantage, and I help people like use hard times to better themselves. And we've kind of touched on that a little bit, but I think that as a kid, I used adversity to my complete disadvantage. Mm-hmm. And I fell quickly into the victim trap. And it's like, as a kid, it's hard because it's not like you're thinking about this stuff when you're like 9 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old. You're more just trying to survive as a teenager, right?
Yeah.
But that adversity for me came in the form of divorce. My parents got divorced when I was 5, at a time where it's been like 30 years now, where back then, like people's families weren't being split apart like they are now. I think the divorce rate now is significantly higher than it was back then. And so I'd be around my friends and I'd be, I guess subconsciously like paying attention and being like, that's odd. Like, why are their families together and mine's not, right? And so that was like the initial impact. Second was I loved sports. I loved playing sports. I loved watching sports. I like collecting like sports cards as a kid, but I was as unathletic as you could imagine.
Really?
I'm serious.
That's so funny. And now you're like a personal trainer. And
yeah, it was bad. And I was always the kid being cut from the special sports teams. I was always the kid being picked last in gym. Wow. And so I started to develop this like, what's wrong with me mentality.
Right.
Like my parents are getting divorced. Like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my situation? I'm not making the same sports teams that my friends are. Like, what's wrong with me? And then as I got into like middle school and in high school, I was bullied a lot. I was picked on by people. I was even made fun of by my friends. And so I think that what happens is that our perceptions of ourselves become hijacked based on like the lies we believe about ourselves. And these can either come from internal words or this can come from like the external. And I started to actually think that there was like something like wrong with me at that point, because I'm like, well, maybe this is something wrong with me. Why am I being picked on and made fun of so much? Why am I not making the sports teams? Like, why is all of this happening to me? The interesting thing is that I thought that my life was just going to be like that forever.
Yeah.
So I stopped caring. And even though like I started to get really depressed and anxious as a kid because of that, because I was like, man, like, why was I born different? Like, all I want is to, fit in a way. All I want is to make these sports teams and have girls that are interested in me and not be made fun of when I went to class. And one of my neighbors was like, hey, I have some pot. And I was 14 at the time. Do you want to try it? And I had seen like some of the kids that I wanted to be like that were like getting the girls and playing sports, like smoking. So I was like, oh, this might be a good thing to try. But what it did for me was different. Like I don't know what it did for them, but what it did for me was I took the first hit off the marijuana pipe and I felt this monkey come off my back for the first time in my life.
Really?
I could be at peace with who I was. I didn't have to worry about being bullied. I didn't have to worry about girls rejecting me. I didn't have to worry about sports. I could be myself and not have to sit in my room sometimes by myself and just cry because I was so upset at the time at the world, because I was like, why is this happening to me? Like, I didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah. You felt like you didn't do anything wrong, that you were getting like all this rejection from so many different angles.
And so my identity of myself was like, it's because you're ugly. It's because you're just unathletic.
Yeah.
And it's because like you're all these things, right? Because I think as men, I mean, this is just, and I think honestly, and I say this, and I think there is some truth to this in a way that like as men, a lot of times you're judged by your athletic abilities, how much money you make, like who you're going out with. And when I say there's some truth, I'm not saying that stuff's not important. Like I think you want to be, with somebody you're attracted to. I think it's important to take care of your health.
Yeah.
I think it's important to make money and provide for yourself and your family, right? But I thought that was going to give me happiness the rest of my life. And later on, I realized that it wasn't. And so I take this hit off the marijuana pipe. I feel amazing. And then that feeling is what became addicting, where I was like, oh my God, like I need this thing because I need to feel normal again. What do I need to do? So then I just started to, smoke every single day. And then I started to develop a bit of a habit and a tolerance to it. And then I was like, all right, if I can sell a little bit on the side to make a little bit of money, it can help support my habit, because I was making my minimum wage at the time was like $5 an hour or something. Like I'm old. And I couldn't afford to spend like $40 a day or $50 a day or whatever it was on pot. And so I would just weigh out a little bit and sell a little bit and then keep the rest for myself.
Wow.
And then that slowly, obviously my habit there progressed. And then from there, my behaviors and emotions started to get impacted too. It started to bring out like the worst in me at times too, especially around my mom, where I would exemplify like anger and emotion because I had all this stuff bottled up from what I had described before. I just didn't know how to manage it.
Right.
I didn't know like what to do with all this stuff that was bottled up inside of me. And so it started to impact our relationship. And then she found out that I was smoking, and then that caused more tension. And then like it was 15, and it was right before my 16th birthday. My mom was having surgery. Mm-hmm. She was having a hysterectomy.
Oh, wow.
And up until that point, I saw people that I knew or friends that would have parties when their parents were gone, because that's kind of what you did when parents were out of town.
Yeah.
You'd have a party, people would come over, and then they were like the cool people, right? Because like, oh my God, like all these people are now giving this person attention, right?
Been there, done that.
Right? And So I was like, gosh, finally it's my shot. I can have a party now. So I had a bunch of people over at my mom's townhouse.
Wow.
Cops came, I ran, and of course they caught me. And then that was like the first major event in my life where I was now doing something in response to my circumstances and making my life worse, right? Because I threw the party to fit in. I threw the party to gain attention. I threw the party to come to school on Monday and have stories to tell about what I did.
Right.
But on the back end, I had all this pain that I've now caused my mom, who was having like massive surgery.
Major surgery, yeah.
Yeah, and that obviously put a strain on our relationship. And then not too long after that was my 16th birthday, and I was still, again, smoking pot every day, selling a little bit to support my habit, and I was weighing out a little bit to sell to my neighbor. At the time, my brother was supposed to watch the door to make sure my mom didn't come in, and in she came, saw me weighing out the pot, busted me. And that day, I got kicked out of her house permanently. Like, I haven't lived there since my 16th birthday. I have not lived with my mom.
Wow.
And my dad and I never really saw eye to eye as a kid. And it was tough, like, growing up in his house. And so when she kicked me out, because she knew how much I didn't, at the time, like living there.
Right.
So when she kicked me out, it was like the biggest slap in the face to me. And again, I wasn't acknowledging that I chose to do what I did.
Right.
You know, I didn't take responsibility for what I had done to lead up to this. It's not like she randomly said, all right, you're out.
Yeah, but you're also still a child. I mean, I know you're 16 and a teenager, but I don't know. I think there's a lot to be said for clearly what you're doing is a cry for help in some way. And, you know, your mom did the best she could at the time and what she thought was the best choice. But it seems like there's other ways that could handle it that maybe could have like helped supported you.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. And I think also at the time, like, dealing with drug addiction then is much different than it is now.
Right.
Now it's much less stigmatized. It's more talked about. There's a lot more resources for parents to have access to. Like, back then, like, pot was still highly illegal.
Right.
So it's different than it is now, which is kind of funny because we just, like, I think Maryland just passed to decriminalize it starting, you know, next year or whatever. Yeah. So it's kind of, right? Again, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's healthy.
Yeah.
However.
Alcohol.
Yeah, alcohol, cigarettes, right? Vaping. However, I still felt the biggest, like, sense of abandonment I've ever felt in my life. And I felt betrayed, like, all the things. And I said some stuff to my mom that you would never want to ever say to anybody. Like, it was just very hurtful what I said. But anyway.
But you were hurt.
I was. And hurt people, right?
Yeah.
So I got kicked out of her house, shipped to my dad's house. And the next day I changed school. So at the time, I think it was maybe a decent idea. Like, their perspective was like, all right, let's pull him out of his environment. Let's put him in a new environment and give him new friends, new opportunities, that sort of thing. But what they didn't understand is that I still had all this stuff inside of me that needed to heal.
Right.
And I was still going to find a way to survive so I didn't have to feel the way that I did before I started to smoke pot.
Right. And then going to a brand new environment with new people where you don't know anybody. I mean, that's got to feel so isolating.
Yeah, it was isolating. It was hard. I would go home and I was miserable, but I found new ways to connect with people. I came to school and immediately, like, touted that I had pot and so they thought I was a narc initially because they were like, why is this kid who's been here for like 2 days being like he has drugs? Like, right?
Red flag.
Yeah, exactly. And I ended up making new friends there once they found out that I wasn't a narc. And so when I'm in this new high school, I'm with my dad permanently full time, and we're just constantly butting heads. Me and my stepmom are butting heads. Like, it was just a combination of, you know, my unhappiness with them and then also my own stuff that I was taking out on them as well. Barely graduated high school because all my friends and I did was ride around and smoke and listen to music. That's all we would do.
What a life.
And then when I graduated, I got kicked out of I left my dad's house. I was like kind of bouncing around from couch to couch.
Yeah.
It was the life, you know?
Right.
And I made a decision. I was like, all right, I can go to community college because the funding wasn't there for me to go to a 4-year school. And I didn't get into some of the schools that I wanted to get into either. It's like, I can go to community college and make the most of it. and then hopefully transition to a 4-year school, or I can just, continue down this path of drugs.
Mm-hmm.
I chose the easier drug route, right?
Really?
And continued to do drugs.
Yeah.
And now again, I was what I had envisioned that I wanted. I was like the cool kid. I was the guy that everyone was calling.
People needed.
Yeah, people needed, people wanted, people loved, right? Because I had this thing.
Right.
That was addicting because I was the kid that had a hard time with, dealing with the fact that I wasn't really like felt loved or needed or wanted by another human being. So that became something that I just couldn't give up either.
It's so interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
But then like as you graduate the drug game and like move up the ladder, you meet more people doing more drugs and harder drugs. And I got introduced to cocaine shortly after I graduated high school. That became addicting because now you're taking a guy who has no self-confidence, no self-esteem, and coke like gives you this crazy euphoric feeling like you can do anything you want,
mm-hmm.
even though you can't, right? But
Right.
you feel like it. And so that became addicting. And I started to develop a habit with that. But the problem with cocaine and me was a guy who was highly anxious, uncertain, unstable at times. A guy like that, and then mixing cocaine into the equation is like somebody trying to lose weight and eating tons of pizza every day. It's just not going to work.
Right.
It's going to make things worse. And so I reached a breaking point with that. And I remember one night I was coming back there, high as heck on coke, high on pot. I was smoking cigarettes at the time. And I felt my heart race. I felt pain in my chest. I felt like tingliness in my face. Like I was shaking, like freaking out. I thought I was dying. Like I thought I was having a heart attack. And I was like, well, I'm high. I'm fat. I had buried like several of my friends at that point. That was another thing. Like I went to funerals like starting when I was a teenager.
Jeez.
Like it was bad. I ran around in like a rough crowd. And so I'm like thinking, I'm like, shit, is this it? Like, am I dying? And I end up figuring out a way to drive back to my friend's house, go inside. I'm like screaming to his mom that we need to go to the emergency room. And she's looking at me and I'm like, I was like 18 or something then, maybe 17, 18. And she's like, what? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean you're having a heart attack? Like you're young.
Yeah.
And so we ended up going to the emergency room and they ended up just discovering that I had had a panic attack.
Wow.
And I didn't know what that was. This is back in like 2005, 2006 or something. Like nobody talked about mental health, let alone like panic attacks. Like that wasn't even a thing. I didn't know they existed. I didn't know what they were. And they just kind of looked at me, the people at the hospital. They're like, you just need to take better care of yourself. Like your heart's actually super healthy considering everything that you've been doing to it.
Right.
And you just need to learn to deal with your anxiety. And so I remember you would think though, like Liv, at this point, there's like that crossroads, right? We talked about a couple of times where it's like, take the hard path. It's initially hard, but long-term, life's going to be a bit easier. Or go to the left, where initially life is kind of easy, but long-term, it's still going to be freaking hard.
Yeah.
And that junction for me came in the form of, you can either continue to do what you're doing now, and life's going to get really hard down the road, or you can suck it up, change your friends, change your habits, make better decisions in your life, and it's going to be hard, but long-term, it'll be better. And I was like, well, I need to survive. Like I'm addicted to my friends now. I'm addicted to the hustle. I'm addicted to the attention, drugs, like everything. I couldn't let that go.
Right. Because what are you without that?
Exactly. My identity was wrapped up in as being like a drug dealer. Like we often joked as kids, it's like if we can't get really fucked up and get high, like what's the point of living? Yeah. Right. It's like crazy. That's awful. I end up like getting out of the hospital, going and buying a book. This is so fun. This is kind of funny to look back. I mean, I can own that it, how humorous it must have looked to my friends.
Yeah.
And it's like how to deal with panic attacks. And so I would end up
like the dummies version, like the
it really was. It was like,
jeez.
And I created like a weird phobia in my head now that whenever I would get high, now I was going to have a panic attack. Like that, my mind put that together. So of course, whenever I got high, what did I do? I had a panic attack. And so I would be driving my car and I'd start freaking out and I have to pull over. My friends would have to drive and they'd be like, Doug, get in the back and read your book. That's what I was.
Jeez.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, to be fair, it's like, what are they? Well, they were probably looking at me like, what the heck is wrong with him? Like, what happened to him? And I had just gotten to a point where I think my nervous system was just so tapped out.
Yeah.
And I just reached a point where my body was like crying for help in any way it could, because I wouldn't give it to myself. So my body was like, all right, well, if you can't do it, I'm going to let everybody know that you're struggling.
Yeah.
And one of my friends offered me a 5 milligram Percocet. And I took it one time, not too long after this. And the same monkey that came off my back when I started to smoke pot came off my back again with the Percocet. And I could finally get high and not have a panic attack. And I was like, oh, I've made it. Like, I found the solution.
Oh, God.
Like, this is it. Like, I'm going to just get high on Oxycontin, on painkillers. And then I can do whatever I want drug wise, as far as like other drugs with my friends, and still maintain that lifestyle that I became addicted to. But what I didn't realize is I knew that I want to say I knew Percocets were bad, that they were addicting. Like, I knew I wasn't putting spinach in my system, right?
Yeah.
I just didn't realize how quickly I get addicted to them. And so 5 milligrams a day quickly became 10, 20, 40, 80, all the way up until I was doing 300-400 milligrams of Oxycontin every single day to support my habit. My habit got so bad.
That's so crazy.
That half my left nostril at the time was missing just from snorting so much stuff. It was really bad.
Oh my God.
It got so bad that I didn't have a bowel movement for like a month.
And like, at what point are you, at any point do you say to yourself, like, this is not normal, like, I can't live like this? What was going through your mind at that time? I
think our environments create a false sense of reality, right?
Yeah. And
I think that's what I created for myself, where I had essentially put myself in this echo chamber.
Okay.
With people that all we were doing was the same thing. It was like, remember I mentioned like graduating, like the drug classes. It's like, once I started to do harder drugs, my friends that were just quote unquote like smoking weed, I no longer needed them.
Yeah.
They weren't interesting to me anymore.
Right.
For a few reasons. A, they couldn't help me get harder drugs. B, I felt ashamed to be around them, because I was like, how come they were able to maintain like that like low level addiction status or whatever, and didn't like have to graduate up the ladder like I did.
Right.
And also, it's just like it becomes such a religion where you don't give a crap about anything other than like
getting high
and who you're going to do it with.
Jeez.
And so I think all the people that I had around me were doing that. So I thought my situation was normal, and that was just, I thought I was just going to die. Like there was times where I would crush up Oxy and I would crush up like a line of Coke together, and I would like just sit there and I'd be like, if I snort this, like, you know, what if I die? Like, well, who would come to my funeral? And so I had this belief that I was just destined for death or failure, that it was going to happen, that it didn't matter if I changed.
That's so awful.
And I think that it was sad, because I knew I was a good kid, and I knew that I just wanted to be loved in a way that I thought I deserved. At that point, like, there was part of me obviously that was like, man, like, I need to figure out a way to get out of this. It's just like, you don't know how.
Yeah. And
it just seems like you're climbing Mount Everest. And again, when my self-esteem was so low and so, you know, damaged.
Yeah.
That the thought of me like trying to climb this mountain of changing my life was just like, there's no way. Like, I'm easier. I'm better off just staying at the bottom.
Right.
And that nearly cost me my life, because, you know, my opiate addiction got really bad, like I mentioned. And then it damaged, you know, relationships in my life, because that became like my relationship.
Yeah.
Was drugs. And that's why you see now, like, a lot of people, you look from the outside, you're like, how can somebody like choose this one thing over like their marriage? How can somebody choose this one thing over their job? Mm-hmm. And it's because our brains get hijacked and warped, and our dopamine system and our reward systems get so twisted, in that what we might have seen as being pleasurable at one point in our life is totally different later on.
Yeah. And
that's what happened with me. And everything kind of came to a head for me Cinco de Mayo 2008, which at the time, like, I thought this was going to be like my biggest setback ever. I thought my life was going to be over, permanently damaged and destroyed, but it ended up becoming like a massive blessing for me, in that I was 20 years old, riding around with a few of my friends to make a drug deal. It's nighttime. Cinco de Mayo, unbeknownst to me, is one of the biggest drinking holidays of the year.
Yeah.
And I had a busted headlight that I'd been meaning to fix that I didn't. and I had a half a pound of pot in my trunk,
Oh my goodness.
$2,000 in cash in the glove box.
God.
And there was a cop, I think he was either running radar or just some sort of like sobriety checkpoint.
Yeah.
And I decided, I was like, oh my God, I don't have my headlights like out. I need to figure out a way to hide this.
Yeah.
So I'm going to flash my high beams at the police officer, and hopefully that'll hide the fact that I have a busted headlight. And in reality, it gave him a reason to pull me over. He's like, why is this moron high beaming me?
Yeah.
Pulls me over. One thing leads to the next. Pulls me out of my car after I like stammer to give him my license and registration, and puts me in handcuffs and finds everything in the car. He finds the pot, finds the money, finds a scale.
Wow.
And I'm sitting in the back of this cop car, and I don't know if you or anybody who might be listening to this or whatever has ever like had this moment where everything comes to a head and your life gets really, really dark very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And you get tunnel vision and you're just thinking to yourself, what happened? Yeah. How did I get here? How did the kid who just wanted to be loved? How did the kid who just wanted to be good at sports? How did the kid who just wanted to fit in? Like, how is he now in the back of a cop car in handcuffs facing felony drug charges? But I ended up going to jail and was charged felony, possession with intent to distribute marijuana. And shortly after that, went to court. And the judge at the time threw the book at me. And he sentenced me to 5 years.
Wow.
Suspended everything but 90 days, meaning if I violated probation, if I failed a drug test, if I caught another charge, if I did anything that went against his rules, the rules for parole and probation, I could potentially have gone back and served that full 5-year sentence.
Wow.
Then he also gave me 5 years probation, 200 hours community service, all kinds of fines and drug classes. But he looked at me. He's like, Doug, you're young. You're 20 years old.
Yeah. This
felony conviction is going to haunt you the rest of your life. If you complete everything without messing up, I'm going to give you a break. I'm like, break? I'm like,
yeah. You're like, what are you called?
I'm like, where's the break?
Yeah.
Am I going to be able to do jail at home? Like, where's the break, right? But even then, I don't know if I would have wanted to do that. But anyway, I digress. And so he's like, if you complete everything without messing up, you don't miss your probation appointments, you do your jail time, you like pass all your drug tests, you do everything.
Yeah.
At the end of your 5 years probation, I'll take the felony conviction off your record and give you a PBJ. And I was just like, all right, whatever. Like, what does that even matter? Like, I'm not going to live to see 25 anyway. I knew I wasn't going to be able to make it because up until that point, I'd failed everything.
Yeah.
I had 21 jobs at the time I was 21. I was a convicted felon. I was a drug addict. I had damaged relationships. I didn't have, I wasn't having many like intimate relationships with girls. Like I was like, I'm clearly a failure. So like, what's the point of believing that I'm actually going to achieve this thing? But nonetheless, took the deal and gave it to me. And then a few weeks later, reported to jail a week after my 21st birthday. And it's interesting because there was so many emotions that come with going to jail. Especially me, who was like the unathletic, goofy, unconfident kid. I'm like, I'm gonna get the crap beaten out of me. But I was riddled with all the emotions you would expect. But when I went into the detention center, I cried because I didn't want to go in. And when I left, I cried because I didn't want to leave.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, so when I got there, like when I went in, the first thing I had to do was kick this opiate addiction. Like I had to detox cold turkey from Oxy for weeks.
Yeah. Which
the symptoms of that were like having the worst case of the flu.
Yeah.
Uncontrollable bowel movements, vomiting, shaking, anxiety, sleepless nights, insomnia. But the one thing that sticks out to me the most, and it was ironically the feeling that I had the hardest time with, it's actually been the most meaningful to me, is this feeling, I don't know if you've ever had this with like bad anxiety, but the feeling of like you're trying to crawl out of your own skin. Like there's something inside of you like trying to leave your body, but it's like not.
You can't.
Right?
Yeah.
But as I look back, that was like the old me trying to leave so that like the new me could become whole. I truly believe that. And my soon to be cellmate was sitting there at the Scrabble table, and he was just like, when you get through your detox, you're going to start working out with me. I was like, bull crap. Like, you see me? I could have been a model for Pillsbury. Like, there's no way it's going to happen. And he was like, all right, man, whatever. And then shortly after that, I see him work out. And he was like a more jacked version of Brad Pitt from Fight Club. Like he was
Wow.
Jacked.
What was he in for?
Just a bunch of different felonies related to addiction
Yeah.
and stuff. And later on, I saw him like work out, and he was like doing all kinds of push-ups, pull-ups, like running all over the common area. I was like, dude, this guy's insane.
Wow. And
then not too long after that, we're having a conversation in the cell, and this is a conversation that changed my life. And he looked at me. He was like, well, what are you doing in here? And I told him, and he was like, quit being a bitch. And it was like in that moment, he didn't tell me what I wanted to hear. He told me what I needed to hear. And here's why. He said, you're blaming everybody else for your problems but yourself. He's like, there's plenty of people that go through what you went through that aren't in jail.
Right.
He's like, you got yourself here, and it's up to you to change. He's like, no one's going to do it for you. Like, no one's coming to rescue you. And he was like, you have two choices. You can be a man, look yourself in the mirror, and say, you got yourself here, and it's up to you to change. You can go be a little bitch, go cry in the corner, say, woe is me, and blame everybody else for your problems. He's like, most people will do that. And at that time, I was just ready, I think, to listen a little bit, because the drugs had been out of my system a bit. And up until that point, I'm like, well, I clearly don't have everything figured out.
Yeah.
I had messed up so many relationships. Like I said, I had so many jobs by that time. I was in jail, convicted felon. So I was like, all right, well, maybe he's right. So not too long after that, I decided to give exercise a try, and he agreed to let him train me in there. And it was hard, because you're in front of a bunch of grown men, and you're always like, I was always worried about what other people thought of me, you know, just like I think a lot of people are when they're younger. And there I was like, man, like now, like it's pretty raw as far as like people being able to see something that quote unquote is wrong with me as far as like my physical abilities. And I remember getting down to do a push-up, couldn't do a push-up, couldn't do one for my knees. And I remember like taking a lap or a break and going up and down the steps, could barely do that because I was, you know, before jail, I had smoked a bunch of cigarettes. Mm-hmm. And my cellmate agreed to train me in there every single day during my 90-day sentence. And we set some goals, like the goals of being able to do a set of 10 push-ups and to be able to run a mile before my sentence was over. And with his motivation and encouragement, training me in there every day, I was able to do it. And it wasn't, I don't think it was necessarily the push-ups and the sit-ups that in the running that necessarily like made me change. It was more what they, I guess, did on a fundamental level to where I was learning to reattach like behavior to emotion, because my go-to before I went to jail was every time I was anxious, do a drug. Every time I was depressed, do a drug. Every time I was stressed, do a drug. Like that was my MO. That was my normal.
Your outlet.
Yeah. Plus I was as raw as possible in there. I was naked spiritually, mentally, emotionally, right? To where there was a lot of, like we talked about breakups, there's a lot of breakups I had to go through. Break up with addiction. I had to break up with trying to fit in. I had to break up with, you know, trying to convince girls to like me. I had to break up with the self-sabotage.
Seeking outside validation, all of that
everything
stuff.
was gone.
Yeah.
And there was nowhere for me to hide anymore. I couldn't hide behind those masks that I was hiding behind before for quite a bit of time. And so I was able to like figure out ways that when I would get stressed or I would get anxious or I would get upset, that I could use fitness as an outlet. And I began to feel better about myself because like there was no, you weren't coming down off of anything after you did that thing. It was like, wow, I actually feel good like the rest of the day after working out. And it was a brilliant thing. And I'm very grateful for that experience. And the day I left, I cried because I didn't want to leave. Because I felt like this transformation was just so special and meaningful in my life that I was like, man, I can't leave. Like up until this point, without jail, I was a failure.
Yeah.
And then this place and having this guy help change my life, it saved me.
Yeah.
And I remember leaving and I was just like, dude, like, how can I ever repay you? And he was like, pay it forward and don't mess up.
Wow.
And he gave me a workout plan that I still have framed in my place today, so I don't forget where I came from.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So once you left then and you kind of felt this, like you're kind of losing this new identity almost because you rebuilt yourself there, but then you had to leave. So then how did you kind of integrate back into your own life to stay on that path and to kind of move forward and go through your journey?
It was hard. I think once I started to develop these healthy habits and that I could exist without drugs and then I could just be, you know, quote unquote normal.
Okay.
and exercise, and that I wanted more for myself. I knew I deserved it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to prove people wrong. Like part of my motivation when I got out, like I would run and I would think about girls who rejected me. I would think about people who bullied me. And I was just like, screw you guys. I'm going to prove you wrong. And that was a big driver for me when I got out. My grandparents took me in, and I'm super close with my grandparents now still. I mean, they've been rocks in my life forever. And I honestly, I owe them everything, because I wouldn't be where I am today without them.
Yeah.
And they gave me some rules. They were like, you can stay here, but you're going to take care of yourself. You're going to work out. You got to try and get a job. We'll give you some spending money if you need it, but you got to bring us receipts of where you're where you're spending your money. They gave me love with accountability, to where they were like, you can stay here.
Yeah.
We're not going to make you pay for stuff, but you also have to, have some skin in the game.
Yeah.
And that helped me. And then as far as my friends, it was hard at first, because again, like my friends weren't inherently bad people. They just were doing things that I just couldn't do anymore.
Right.
So I would still, try to spend time with them, because I was 21. You have to remember, like, I was also very young.
Yeah.
Where people at that age, it's like you're partying all the time. Like that's the lifestyle. And I would still spend time with my friends. I wouldn't, do drugs or whatever. But it got to a point where it was like being on an awkward first date. That's the only way I know how to explain it, to where I had started to, when I got out of jail and got more into working out, started to read more about fitness and stuff, I was into different things. And so whenever I would see my friends, it was just awkward.
Yeah. Like you didn't have anything to talk about.
Because I just become a different version of myself. And I wasn't the same person they remembered me, right, as. And so we would just be sitting there and be like awkward. And I didn't know, like, again, I hadn't done any quote unquote, like real, I guess, work or understanding. Because again, I'm 21.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why am I feeling this way? This is very weird.
Yeah.
And I guess I came to terms like, I just didn't have anything in common with them anymore. And so I started to spend more time alone at my grandparents' house. We would watch like Dancing with the Stars, Food Network. But I taught with the help of like watching the Food Network and like watching my grandmother cook, I taught myself how to cook.
Wow.
Yeah, which is like a great skill that I have now, where I love cooking and I'm a good cook. And I also got comfortable being alone.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many times in life where people feel way more lonely spending time with people they really aren't aligned with than they ever will, like being intentionally alone.
Yeah.
And I got to learn that early on, where I didn't need to go out. I could just sit there and I would find it comforting, and I would find it soothing to just hang out with my grandparents and just watch TV. I mean, it's funny as it sounds.
No, I think that's huge. I feel like a lot of people don't know how to be alone, and will spend time with people because they aren't comfortable being alone or being by themselves. And so they just kind of fill that with other people that maybe they don't even align with.
Yeah, I mean, it's true, because it's like if you aren't with somebody or you're not hanging out with people, you're like, your mind automatically goes to, is it because I'm a loser? Or is it because I'm not worthy of,
or not wanted?
Yeah, exactly. You're missing out. And then slowly but surely, in that time, I started to allocate it to better myself. I went back to school, and now I've got my 2-year degree and finished like magna cum laude, which CCBC, I know, but
it's amazing.
I know.
That's awesome.
And then I started to work on myself, figure out that I wanted to become a personal trainer eventually, which I did roughly, I guess it was, I've been a trainer now for almost 12 years. So I guess a little over 2 years after being out of jail, I became a personal trainer. And I felt like I had been kept alive for a reason.
Yeah.
That I had gifts that I'd been given that I wanted to share with other people. And I also started to meet other people in my life that became like solid friends of mine that I'm still friends with now and spend time with, that were more aligned with where I was going. And they weren't aligned with where I was. And I think that's a big mistake. And something I know that people like to hear me say is that, like, one of the things that I will often say is that, it's so much better to spend time with people that you have common futures with and not common pasts. I think that's the mistake people make, is it's easy to look back and say, well, I've known these people for 10 years. I've known these people for, the last, 3 years, or I've spent so much time with them. We have all these memories, but they're not like on the same path as you anymore.
Yeah.
Like there's an expiration date, I think, sometimes for people.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's something people should always be reevaluating, is who they're spending time with, and What do those people look like? Do you have similar values? Are they going where you want to go, or are you just spending time with them because it's comfortable and it's what you know?
Yeah, it's comfortable. It's what you know. And I think it's also easy, right, to spend time with those people because they're secure. Like we all want security. Like I think there's a few basic human needs that we all want, right?
Love.
Love, security, meaning, and community.
And mac and cheese.
Yeah, mac and cheese. Yes, I love mac and cheese. It's so good. And it's like security, but I think sometimes we go about getting those things the wrong way, which again, I've been there. I don't judge anybody who does, but I can say just from experience that it's not where you want to be long term. And when I became a trainer, I found like a new high in helping people because I felt like I had all these gifts that I learned just through my own fitness journey, being in jail, with the help of my cellmate, Eric, that I was able to reach people at a pretty emotional level. Yeah. And I was able to like build a pretty successful business quick because I could connect with people on deep things. Like I was having deep conversations with people where they would be like, I want to lose weight. And I would be able to like get to the bottom of it.
The underlying, not just like the physical, like vanity portion of it, but like the mental, like emotional meaning behind it for them. Yeah. I think that's really important. Yeah.
And once I'd shared a little bit about my story, they would open up even more. And then we would have some sort of like a connection. And then that just kind of snowballed. And I ended up becoming like the top producing trainer in the history of the company my first year there.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy.
How did that feel for you? Because a lot of your past, the story you kept telling yourself was that you felt like such a failure. So then to reach an achievement like that, what did that feel like?
It was surreal. And I still like had a hard time like believing if it was actually legit. Yeah. Because I was still kind of disconnected from who I truly was. And I had, built this successful business, and then, time had flown by where I, had been a trainer now for years, and my probation was up at that point because, like I said, time quickly flew by as I became a trainer. And one of my clients was a lawyer. So we wrote a letter to the judge requesting modification of my sentence. And he ended up granting me my day in court. Wow. Because I completed all the stipulations he gave me. And in January of 2014, he took the felony conviction off my record and gave me a PBJ. And it was funny, like that day, because I still had a hard time like believing that I was actually doing this and that I was actually smart. And that it was actually because I was good at what I did and not because I was just lucky. Yeah. That I was on the front page of the Baltimore Sun's like health and fitness section. Wow. For training like these. They wanted to know what college kids were doing. And I had a couple groups of college girls that would train with me. Yeah. During the like winter break, and like the Baltimore Sun came into like a feature story, and it just so happened that it ran like the day I went back to court. Wow. And that's interesting. It's so crazy. And
very, so very neat divine timing.
It is. And he took the conviction off my record, and I was just sitting there like kind of in shock. I didn't know what to say. Like people are crying, they were pretty emotional because it was like a cool story. Yeah. But I'm still like, whatever, Right. And then that inspired me to write my first book, From Felony to Fitness to Free, to encourage people to make this their most of their second chance, turn negative into a positive. But I still like felt broken. When I say I felt broken, this is like, at this point, gosh, what was I? I was like in my mid-20s, I guess. And I was in really good shape. I mean, I'm in good shape now, but I was in like peak physique shape because that was the same time that I had this like literally come to Jesus moment where I thought that if I looked a certain way, and then if I like dated these girls and did all these things and was successful, that I'd be happy. And there was still like something wrong because I would look in the mirror. I still saw the fat Doug in the mirror. I still saw the guy who had no success with relationships as a teenager. I still saw the guy who made a bunch of mistakes, who went to jail, and I hadn't come to terms with that. Like I had a lot of success, and I have had a lot of, transformational things happen from a fitness perspective. Right. But I felt like I just, used that as a way to bypass some of the things that I actually needed to work on. Yeah. And there were times, Liv, where I would sit there and I'd have like crazy anxiety, panic attacks. I'd have all these things happening with inside of me. And I'm like, why am I feeling this way?
Yeah.
Like I'm so successful. I'm like doing what I want to do. I'm doing what I love. I'm so lucky to be alive. Like all these things. Like, why am I feeling this way? And one of my therapists was like, what was your childhood like? And I was just like, I had talked about it a lot then. I had talked about my parents getting divorced, like all these things. And she was like, no, like from like a emotional survival standpoint, like what was it like? You were raised in like grew up in chaos.
Yeah.
So you're going to create chaos no matter what. And I'm super like, I'm pretty logical. So I'm like, oh, finally. Because I think sometimes when people don't understand what's going on, they have no idea why something's happening. It makes them even more irritated because they want solutions, right? They want to be able to fix it.
Yeah.
But now when I heard that, I was like, oh, it makes sense. Like this actually makes sense.
Yeah.
To where like that's my body's normal. And then
you could like put the equations together and see it. Like, okay.
Yeah. And then she was asking more questions of being bullied and picked on, and that my perception of myself was still like in the old Doug.
Yeah.
Where I hadn't like come to terms with like this new person, even though I look completely different. My brain was so focused on the older version of me.
Yeah. And it's like you looked different, but there was still like the unhealed version, the traumatized version that needed to be like dealt with and understood.
And there's a lot I needed to let go of too. Like there was a lot of pain that I just held on to and resentment, like towards my mom specifically, because I just wanted a relationship with her. Like I wanted things to be different. I was wanting her to forgive me. I mean, it took a while for her to come back around. And like, even when I was like doing some amazing things to truly like forgive me, or, even, be able to like spend significant time with her, it took some time. And that was one of the most painful times in my life, I should say, because I'm in a place where I'm doing so well. And I'm just like, well, what do you want? Like, I'm doing so good. Like, how come, why aren't you proud of me? And I think she probably, of course was, but didn't feel that way to me. But there was an important conversation that happened as a result of me becoming a Christian. Now, when I say I'm a Christian, I'm not like dogmatic religious. I just believe in Jesus. I believe in God. I'm also very spiritual. Like I believe there's something greater out there looking out for me. And I know that a lot of the stuff that I did in my past has been like forgiven based on that, and that it's being used to help myself become better, and also for me to help the greater good. And I say that because not too long after I had this like awakening of, well, life still sucks for you, Doug, even though you've achieved these things. I was trying to figure out like what did I need to do? I mean, I had come to terms with I started to come to terms with why I was feeling chaotic, and I come to terms with the fact that I was actually like an attractive dude. I don't say this in an arrogant way, but it was like, you have to remember my entire life I was told that I was ugly, that I was fat, like all these things. And so when I got to a point where I was starting to get attention from people, consistently, I had a hard time accepting that and being like, all right, do they really like me, or are they just messing with me?
Am I worthy of this?
Is this a joke? Right. And so I'm on a walk or a run with a mentor of mine, and he's like, you need some like faith in your life. I'm like, dude, there's no way. Like, I'm kind of thinking to myself, there's no way I need this. He's like, you're a good looking dude. You have a good group of friends. Like, you're doing really good work, but you need some like faith. And then at the same time, one of my clients was a non-denominational pastor at Grace, a local church. And he was always happy. I was like, dude, what's wrong with this guy? Why is he so happy? I was like, why is he so different? Right. And he's an amazing person, but he just had this different energy about him. And I was like, man, he's always like optimistic. And he was like, you should come to church with me on Sundays. And I'm like, no. I'm like, I'm going to hell for putting you through this workout. Like, I was the devil back then, when it came to that stuff. Because I was also angry at religion, angry at God. Because I was like, if God is real and God's about love, then why did all this crap happen to me? Like, why? Like, did he hate me? And so I I developed this hatred towards him. And I get like emotional telling this part of the story, because it was like a game-changing moment for me. But there was just like a time where it was like one day I just like had my latest like run, but like I did my latest time where something with a girl didn't work out because I didn't either. Just something had happened where it just didn't work out. Like, it was just like I either pulled away, which I did a lot at that time because I didn't think it was real, or something happened. And I was upset because I was like, why is this kind of stuff still continuing to happen to me? Why can't I just let go of some past things? And I called my client, Ben. I was like, hey, I think I'm ready to give this Jesus thing a try. And I swear, it felt like I just told him he won the Mega Millions. I was like, why is this guy so happy?
That's funny. And
so I go into his office and I'm like telling him this. He's like having me do this prayer, accepting that Jesus died for my sins, yada, yada, yada. And I started to cry. And I felt this same monkey come off my back that I did with drugs. And I went out and I called my mom.
Wow.
And for the first time in my life, I told her I was sorry. Where I meant it. Where it wasn't like, I didn't want anything in return.
Yeah.
Like I just wanted to say I was sorry. And that helped create a bridge in our relationship. And then we started to have like deeper conversations around addiction and drugs. And I remember like one of the most important conversations we had was, well, first of all, I think when it comes to forgiveness, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do, but you're only robbing yourself, because it's the old saying, it's like you're drinking poison and waiting for the other person to drink it too. Like,
yeah,
it's hard, but you just got to do it. And I think also with forgiveness, especially with somebody in your life you care about, that you want a relationship with, that you're still mad at, it's like, I'll say sorry when you say sorry.
Right.
And I'm not doing it until you say sorry. But then once they say they're sorry, you're like quick to say I'm sorry, because you knew you really wanted to, but your ego got in the way.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't want to be the one to make it like that I lost somehow and they won, right?
Right.
And so my mom and I were at dinner one night, and she just said, and she didn't even really know, to the extent of how much drugs I was doing. She was like, what was something that you think I could have done differently? And I just said, I wish you would have just asked why. And I don't think she knew how bad I was hurting.
Yeah, and how painful it was.
Like how much damage I was doing to myself, and how much was being done to me at school and everything. And I just said, like I was really having a hard time. I was like, this, that, and the other thing happened. And
what did she say to that?
Like she accepted it, but she apologized.
Wow.
And so that was a big turning point, because then what I realized is a lot of my pain in relationships was I was looking for validation, the validation that I never got from my mom.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they say like daddy issues, mommy issues. Like I think that in a nutshell, like that can be like what it is. Right. Whereas where I wasn't receiving like love from my mom, so I had to figure out a way to get it from somebody else. Mm-hmm. And it just came in the form of me just constantly seeking attention from women, even though like I sometimes wasn't even interested in a relationship with them.
Yeah, you just wanted the validation.
I just wanted to be like, all right, they're interested in me.
The acceptance.
That's it, game over.
Yeah.
And then my mom and I have done a lot of work on our relationship, and got to a point where I walked her down the aisle when she got remarried a couple of years ago with my brothers, and we now have we're super close.
That's good.
I mean, super close. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. I mean, obviously we still, just like any family members, we'll still butt heads every once in a while, but honestly, we really don't disagree. We don't get emotional. It's just we've come to terms with things, and it's been hard. It's been a lot of work, but it's worth it, because I want a relationship with my mom.
Yeah.
It'd be a lot, again, going back to the theme of this conversation in a way, is there's these two paths. It's the path of hard, early on, but long term it's easier. It's the path of easy short term, but long term it's going to be incredibly harder. And it was hard initially to have that relationship with my mom, but because of that, it has meant so much to me on many levels, that I can forgive somebody that in my mind for years didn't treat me the way I thought that I deserved to be treated. Mm-hmm. It taught me to look myself in the mirror and say, whoa, buddy, it's not all about the other person. It's about you too.
Right.
And also that I can now have a relationship with her.
Yeah.
That I may not have had I've taken the other path of being an idiot. Not just going back into addiction, but just turning my back to her and not wanting to talk to her anymore.
Right.
And, but yeah, I mean, it's been a great learning experience healing that relationship with her.
That's beautiful. And I'm glad that you've been able to do that.
Yeah.
I think relationship with your mom is incredibly important.
It is.
And not one you'll always have. So I think a lot of people take it for granted.
For sure.
I know that you've mentioned that, for a while it was about like the money and getting in shape and the women, like, and you realized that wasn't really what could make you happy and that you had to kind of go inward. How do you like maintain like a checkpoint with yourself to make sure that you're not still kind of like reaching or seeking for kind of this like external validation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a dance, right? But I think it's kind of like, for me, like country line dancing. I remember I took country line dancing lessons like years ago. And when I started to do it, I was awful at it. I was horrible at it. But the more I did it and the more I practiced every single week, the better I got at the dance, right? And I think that's just like life, in that the more you practice the dance, the more you practice something that's challenging, the better you get at it. And obviously I'm in a position with the podcasts and having a social media platform and doing what I do where it's really easy for me to fall into the trap of getting external validation. I mean, people reach out to me all the time. It's easy for me to like fall into that and use that as a way to make me happy. But I think like years ago, I've just learned that doesn't make me happy. And like once my brain like identifies something like that, it's just like I'm able to shut it off. And now it's like there's so much more substance to what I do and why I do it, that's not what brings me joy. Like me getting a bunch of likes on a social media post, or me interviewing somebody big on my show, or whatever it could be to bring me external validation, isn't what moves me. It's great. I mean, it does validate me. Yeah. But what actually brings me true like validation is people that I've helped along the way that reach out to me that are like, hey, because of your podcast, like I've stayed sober, or because of your podcast, it's changed my life, or because of X, Y, and Z, like you've helped me, or thank you so much for sharing that message. It resonates. So that's where I find like meaning now. It's like, well, what's my purpose? What's my mission? And with girls, like, I mean, of course, I've definitely had my issues with women. I mean, I think everybody at some point, like you have issues with relationships. And I think I learned a hard lesson a couple of years ago, and I don't want to get, specifics into things, but where I was in a relationship for the wrong reasons. Right. And it was a hard lesson to learn, because I liked the person. I loved the person. Like I thought that the person was a great person, but long term, I knew it wasn't the right thing for me. But in my head, and this wasn't like making me like happy. Like I wasn't I wasn't like a guy who was like on top of the world or anything. I thought I could conquer anything because of this. It was more, I was like, oh, like I think this is the right thing for me, But then when I realized it wasn't, my mind goes, crap, like, when are you gonna find something else? Right. Is something better gonna come along? Are you gonna be able to like figure out like how to navigate a breakup? Like all these things that would go through your mind when something like that happens. And so again, I was pretty, I think, mature for the most part about the process, but instead of me being like, okay, like it's time to end this, I continued to extend it, and it didn't, benefit anybody. And so then when I got out of that relationship, it forced me to go a level deeper in my work, because like now my inner work is now at that point, I'd already realized that women weren't going to make me happy. I'd already realized that success wasn't. Yeah. I realized that being fit wasn't. But I had to understand like why I was attracting certain things into my life.
I feel like the reason a lot of relationships fail is because people do end up continually repeating the same patterns and they don't even realize it. And then once that kind of honeymoon, like love phase wears off and that goes away, you're left with like what's left, which is somebody that you may not align with, and if you don't like do the work to kind of understand, I think, who you are, what your patterns are, and who you want to be, then you're never going to be able to meet somebody that's on that same journey.
I think people get trapped because of what you said, but also I think on a deeper level, I think what happens with people, and I just know this from my experience, like in my 20s versus compared to where I'm at now and what I look for, is that in my 20s, like you have like your identity of who you are, what you want, your values, but you also at some point, like you want this relationship to work. You want like something to be committed. You want security. You want to say that you're dating this person or you have this thing. Right. So sometimes the goalposts get moved a little bit. And now like your beliefs and values, all of a sudden you're like,
that's such a funny analogy. I love that.
Where it's like, oh, like, you know, you're somebody who doesn't like vanilla ice cream, but all of a sudden, like the person you're dating, you're like, oh my God, like, you know, they seem nice. I like vanilla ice cream. You know what I mean? Like I like country music, and in reality, like you hate country music, but then you end up just losing yourself.
Yeah.
And then you end up getting to that point, like I think what you alluded to, where the honeymoon phase wears off. And now you're in a relationship with somebody where you're not only aligned with them, but you've also like sacrificed your own identity to be with that person. And you're miserable and unfulfilled, and people are trying to figure out why. And I think it's because they ended up like initially not having the hard conversations to say, no, I'm not interested, because they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or they don't want to like risk not having that quote unquote security.
Yeah.
And they don't stand true to who they are. Right. And I think that's where now it's like, I mean, you're never going to find the perfect person, but I think there's like some important things like being able to talk to somebody like we've touched on, having the same things that you are aligned with. It's not like everybody, I mean, in my opinion, You're
not going to like the same ice cream, but I think it goes deeper.
For sure. I was just making
I know.
I was just making a funny example. And then I think on top of that, it's like, do you understand or get each other?
Yeah.
Like that's important, because I think what happens initially is it's like you have these like surface level conversations. You're like, oh my God, like I like going to this bar. Like, oh, I like going to that bar. And you're like, oh, like,
yeah.
And, you know, and then you're like, oh, like I like this, I like that. And you're like, oh, I found my person.
Yeah.
They're nice to me. They treat me well. And especially like when somebody gets out of something challenging.
Yeah.
You're like, wow, they're so nice to me. When reality, like that's like a given. Like you should always want to be with somebody that's like nice to you. I mean,
oh, that's so funny. That's so true, though. It's like, oh, he's so nice. He should be. Like, what?
I know, like what? Like he actually, like, you know, he picks up like the bill or whatever, you know, and it's like, oh, I think that's like a good thing to do sometimes, right? Yeah. Obviously. And then I think like on the next level from that, it's like being able to have these conversations and develop your values. And then like when somebody doesn't align with that,
yeah,
being like, and just walking away. And that's how you develop new patterns. Like that's how what I've done is that, you know, there's been plenty of opportunities for me to like go out with people and have deeper relationships with people that I wasn't aligned with. But I knew at the end of the day, like I just wouldn't be happy long term.
Yeah. I think a lot of people sacrifice themselves for the sake of being wanted and accepted. And I think a lot of that goes back to childhood for people. And I think a lot of people sacrifice like their own values just for the sake of having somebody or for being accepted.
Yeah. And then at the end of the day, they end up like more miserable than they were before, because there's time that, you know, in many cases has been wasted. There's now deeper levels of pain.
Suppressing your needs.
And then that becomes like a pattern. And then it's like starting like back lower than where you were before, because now you got all this other stuff that's been created as a result of that. And you got to continue.
What a disaster.
What a disaster. And I've done it before. But yeah.
Me too. Oh, man. Okay. So your podcast is the Adversity Advantage. What currently in your life would you say is an adversity that you're facing now?
I'd say like one of the biggest things that I'm having a hard time with is like feeling that I'm doing enough.
Okay.
And that I'm not like leaving like anything on the table.
In what way?
I just think that sometimes I worry if I'm living up to my fullest potential at times.
Wow.
Because, you know, like once you start to have some success, it's like, well, what's next? Mm-hmm. You know, because a lot of the stuff I'm doing now, I never thought I could do. Right. And I think that's great perspective. And it's obviously, I'm very grateful. And I'm not saying this in a way where it's necessarily bringing me down, but it's something that I often think about. It's like, am I doing enough? Like, should I be speaking more? Should I be doing all these other things? And it's adversity for me, because I think this is a very real life example of of when mindsets like this can lead you down a destructive path to where people harp on them so much that it ends up getting in the way of what they're doing now. Mm-hmm. To where it ends up, coming out in relationships or their job or whatever. And I think for me now, I have that in the back of my mind. I'm always like, all right, dude, like, are you doing enough? Like, you should be reaching out to that person. Like, you should be doing that. You should be doing this. But I'm also, I have a good perspective. I'm like, hey, I've accomplished so much.
Yeah.
But it's also like the hardest part is like, how do you measure potential?
Right.
It's like, how do you know? Because I want to be able to, like, when it's all said and done, to have God or Jesus or whoever I meet, like, be like, man, like, you gave it your all. Mm-hmm. Because it's easy, I think, sometimes to, like, when you have success, to be like, all right, like, I'm good for a little while, I'm good. And that's like something that I'm just like always thinking about is like, what can I do more of?
Yeah, that's got to be such a hard thing to work through, because I know, at least personally, I like staying present is a challenge for me, and trying to just focus on the moment I'm in. And like you said, you've come so far and you've done so much to like really relish and soak up like what you're currently working on, but also still staying motivated and looking at the future and reaching goals. So finding that balance is probably challenging. It
is. And I think it's just part of life,
Yeah.
I think what you said is like staying present. Like that's the ultimate like secret sauce, right? Yeah. I mean, I think if people can learn to master that will get them further than most other things in life.
Yeah.
When you learn how to stay present, because you're not focusing so much on what happened before, and you're not focusing on what needs to happen tomorrow, right? But I think it's also very challenging because we live in a world, because of social media and just access and stuff, that it's super easy to look at what other people are doing.
Yeah.
And be like, gosh, they're so much further along than me.
I know.
Or do I need to be doing that? Or should I be doing that? Or should I go there? And then your mind ends up taking that and then internalizing it. And when you internalize it, I think people, they get trapped, because now it's like overwhelming, and that starts to become their reality. And I think one of the things that I've been very fortunate to be able to learn is that feelings aren't facts. And that just because I see something on social media, or just because somebody says something to me that might spark something inside of me that's like, gosh, I need to be doing more, I still now accept that I'm doing okay. Mm-hmm. And that it's part of the process, and that you're not a failure. You're not a loser. Like, this is where you're at. It's a season of your life.
Yeah.
And you got to just work through this season. You got to just give it your best throughout this time. And so I think being able for me to focus on what I can control, how am I showing up in relationships? How am I showing up at work? Am I giving it my best on the podcast? Am I taking care of my health? Like, all those things help me, because I know I can control those things. And I know if I don't do those things, I won't live to my fullest potential. If I don't have good relationships, it's going to bring me down. If I don't take care of my health, it's going to bring me down. If I don't live in integrity and do my best, it's going to bring me down. Like, all these things that I know will at least get me closer to that end goal of living to my fullest potential, if that makes sense.
How will you know when you've reached your fullest potential?
I mean, I don't know. That's the thing. I think
every day that you live, I think every day that you live, it's your fullest potential. Like, today I'm showing up as me, and that's my fullest potential, right? Like, could you say that for yourself? Like, every day that you're here and you're being you, that's your potential.
For sure. I mean, I think, yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, I thought, like, as far as like external and like what's my potential as far as contribution to the world.
Yeah.
It's hard, because part of it's like, do I have some weird like godlike superiority complex where I think I can actually do more than I can?
Like, you feel like you're not making a big enough impact?
Yeah, maybe that's a better way of putting it, where I'm like, all right, I have this opportunity, and whenever I speak, like, people are blown away, or whenever I share my story, people are like captivated, or...
Well, I think the trouble with that too is like, you can't possibly measure how much impact you're creating and giving, because you might get some feedback and you might like be able to measure it in some capacity, but you really can't in its full capacity. So I think that's a hard thing to do, to say like, oh, am I giving the most impact? Am I reaching my full potential? Am I helping as many people as possible? Like, you won't ever know the amount of people that you're helping,
True. Yeah. You're never going to know. But I think there's still like in human nature for me in the back of my mind. It's like, am I reaching enough people? And it's a dance, but again, it's like, goes back to the theme of the conversation. It's like, what am I going to do? Am I going to focus on all that is, and it be used as quote unquote negative? Or is it going to motivate me to just continue to better myself and to do what I can and to be more present and to focus more on relationships, which it's another, another focus of mine is just spending more time like on my personal life. Cause I still like go out and I have fun, but I work a lot.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's hard because again, that's where the potential thing can be negative. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, oh, I'm doing this, and this because I'm not feeling like I'm doing enough. But
then that could be taking away from
right
building and growing relationships outside of work and
for sure
your impact.
Because I'd be lying if I said like life's always perfect, because life's not.
Mm-mm.
And I think there's always going to be certain things in life that you're not as good at, because I don't believe that life's ever in balance. It's more like I think your focus just changes.
Yeah.
That's
a good way to put it.
And I think for me now, like I'm obviously focused on my business, but I'm more trying to focus on my personal life too, just because I'm like, eventually like I'd like to settle down at some point, right?
Yeah.
But it's not. I think the difference with where I'm at with that now and like when I was younger was before that was like, it was like a fitness goal where I was like, at the end of the year, I'm going to be able to run a half marathon. At the end of the year, I'm going to be settled down with somebody. And then what you do, like it's not the same as fitness, because in fitness, you can do whatever it takes to reach that goal.
Right.
And you do everything. With love and like romance, it's not that simple.
Right.
There's a couple variables, right? You can't force somebody into a relationship with you. And I think the trap that happens more often is that you end up like forcing a relationship with somebody you shouldn't be in a relationship with, just to get that thing, that status. And then you end up like looking back and being like, oh, like, how do I get out of this? Well, am I going to find anything better? Like, what am I going to do? Like, now I got to start this process all over again. And it's just a crazy reality of life.
Yeah.
There's too many variables. And I also think that like, with relationships, it's different. Like it's hard to like, if you like spending time with somebody, it's easy to just say, hey, let's spend more time together. But I think when you end up like crossing a certain point, it's like, how do you take that to the next level? Not even like in a relationship, but how do you just know if you're making the right decision?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and this is like something that's speaking from somebody who's like very like confident and I'm very assertive, but I still like have times where I'm like, is this the right thing to do? Like, should I be doing this? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's always going to be there in some way, shape or form,
For sure. And I think I need to be with somebody as well that's like, that understands like where I've been a little bit and can relate to that, or just accepts like the flaws of me, because I'm still like
I think that's what anybody hopes for, is someone that is accepting of the flaws and can kind of support them in a way that can help them continue their own journey, like, through healing and doing inner work, but not be there as like a crutch.
Right.
It's like a fine line, I guess. But
yeah, 100%. I think the hardest part of all of that, it's like, how do you know that that's the person you are?
You can only know till you know.
No, I know. I know.
Let's see if there's anything else I want to talk about. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Whatever.
I don't know. I feel so weird.
Why?
I don't know. Do you ever just feel like you're like, what the fuck am I doing?
Every day. Come on.
Okay, good. So I'm not the only one. I did want to ask you if you celebrate Cinco de Mayo, like obviously in a different way than most people, but is it a date that you kind of...
Yeah, it's a big day because I'm like, It's like that Celine Dion song. It's like, all coming back. You know what I'm talking about?
Moments ago and there were flashes of light.
Yeah. So
I love that song.
Yeah. I don't know if it has the same meaning as what I'm talking about.
It doesn't. I think she's talking about an old lover coming back, but sure.
Yeah.
The date,
drugs,
it's all coming back.
Drugs.
Your old lover.
Drugs.
Yeah.
And so I certainly still think about it when the day happens.
Yeah.
And I'm like, gosh, man, look at how far I've come. Like that's as much as like the last few minutes we've talked about some of the things that I have a hard time with.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good that I obviously in my life. And I'm felt constantly celebrating how far I've come. And that's a good reminder on that day. And that I think about like my life could have been so much different.
Yeah.
Hadn't it not been in my cellmate recently passed away.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it was hard to speak at his funeral. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was. But I mean, again, it's like doing stuff like this. Like you talk about like me getting meaning. His family was like reaching out to me being like, wow, I can't believe, like, it was so amazing to hear you talk about him on podcasts because it makes us remember like the good times with him, you know, the good side of him.
Yeah.
I never thought that would be like one of the things that comes from this. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's a great, you know, holiday for me to celebrate now. I still kind of like, if I go out, it's like I'm like getting like tacos or something, you know?
Yeah. But I mean like on a deeper level for you personally, you know, it's like
sure.
a date that it kind of will remain as a very significant, if not the most significant turning point in your life, I would say. Right.
It was.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there was so much wrong in my life at that time.
Yeah.
That I don't even know how I managed to crawl out of that place.
Yeah.
In the way that I did. Because I think it would have been easy for me to crawl deeper into the hole where life could have taken me a different direction. I mean, if I had met my cellmate in jail, I don't know. I honestly don't know if I would have worked out.
Right.
I had no motivation to work out when I was in there. I was just buying my time, still mad at the world, and was just waiting to get out to figure out what I was going to do next. So there's a lot to celebrate in the fact that I think so many times in people's lives, they go through these moments, and in the thick of the moment, it feels like the world is completely against them. And it feels like that situation is going to break you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Because we get tunnel vision, we get stressed, we get anxious, and we're like, I'm just going to focus on this and nothing else because I just need to, you know, figure out a way to how to process this. But then when people realize is most of the time, like you get on the other side of that thing, you're like, oh, it wasn't so bad. Like, why did I spend so much time focusing on that? You know, I should have focused on other things. And then that's another thing, right? Where people just have regret about not spending more time on the right things. And my point is that once you're able to get through on the other side, you're able to look back and be like, man, like I'm so grateful that happened to me because of all these things.
Yeah.
Right. I'm so grateful that it taught me the importance of, you know, gratitude. It taught me the importance of being mindful of how I behave. It taught me the importance of just being in tune with my emotions and my thoughts and being kinder to people, even though I don't agree with what they were doing in my life at the time or whatever the case was. So there's definitely a lot of positive that came from that.
Yeah.